Supreme Commander Vextar stood before the massive display screen showing Valari Prime, and felt a satisfaction he had not experienced in months. The planet hung in space like a blue and green jewel, still beautiful despite the industrial scars the Empire had carved into its surface. In 6 hours, his fleet would begin bombardment operations that would turn that beauty into burning rock. All ships report ready for planetary sterilization, his aide announced. Civilian evacuation efforts have been detected, but our analysts estimate that 90% of the population will still be on the surface when bombardment begins. Vexitar nodded with approval. The death of billions of innocent beings would send a message across the galaxy that resistance to the Kreth Empire was not just futile, but fatal for entire species. What Supreme Commander Vextar did not know was that Jake Morrison had been expecting this moment for weeks. Deep in a hidden command center built into an asteroid, Jake looked at the faces of his senior staff and saw his own grim determination reflected in their eyes. "They're really going to do it," Lisa said quietly. "Every biological scan confirms massive population centers on Valari Prime. They're planning to commit genocide." "How long do we have?" Jake asked. 6 hours until bombardment begins, Greg replied from his tactical station. "The Kreth fleet is moving into optimal firing positions now." Jake looked at the strategic display showing every human team and allied resistance group scattered throughout the system. For months, they had been fighting a careful war designed to minimize casualties while achieving maximum disruption. They had followed rules of engagement that tried to spare innocent lives whenever possible. Now those rules were about to change. "Signal all teams," Jake commanded. "Authorization code Omega. Full Deathworld protocols are now in effect." The response from his teams was immediate and chilling. Ryan's voice came through the communication system with cold professional calm. "Understood, Captain. Rules of engagement are now unrestricted. All Kreth forces are designated as valid targets regardless of surrender attempts." Nina's voice followed. "Suicide attack teams are standing by for final authorization." Amy's engineering crews reported in from positions throughout the Kreth fleet. "Reactor destabilization charges are in place and ready for detonation." Pete's strategic warfare teams confirmed their positions. Captured Kreth ships are prepared for ramming attacks against primary targets. What happened next would be studied by military historians for generations, though few would fully understand the psychological transformation that had taken place. Jake Morrison and his crews had spent months fighting a restrained war, trying to minimize death while protecting innocent civilians. Now faced with the planned genocide of billions, they abandoned all restraint. The first wave of attacks began while Supreme Commander Vextar was still positioning his fleet for planetary bombardment. Amy's engineering teams, who had been hiding inside, captured Kreth ships for weeks, simultaneously detonated charges in the reactor cores of 12 capital ships. The explosions created a chain reaction that destroyed another 8 vessels and crippled dozens more. Nina's suicide attack teams launched from hidden positions throughout the asteroid belt. They flew small craft loaded with improvised explosives directly into Kreth command ships, targeting bridge sections and communication arrays. Unlike previous raids designed to capture or disable enemy vessels, these attacks were intended to kill as many Kreth officers as possible. Pete's captured Kreth ships began ramming attacks against the largest enemy vessels. The sight of Kreth ships attacking other Kreth ships created confusion throughout the fleet. But the confusion lasted only moments before massive explosions made the attackers' intentions clear. Most terrifying of all, Jake's human teams began broadcasting their exact positions to ensure that any Kreth counterattacks would result in mutual destruction. They were no longer trying to survive the battle. They were trying to make victory so costly that the Kreth would be unable to continue their expansion even if they won. Supreme Commander Vextar watched his carefully organized fleet dissolve into chaos and felt something break in his mind. The tactical display showed impossible things. Enemy forces that attacked without hope of survival, ships that rammed his vessels instead of trying to escape, explosions that seemed designed to maximize casualties on both sides rather than achieve strategic objectives. "They are destroying themselves just to hurt us," he said to his aide, his voice carrying a mixture of horror and confusion. "Why would any species choose mutual annihilation over submission?" The aide had no answer because no species in galactic history had ever made such a choice. Every intelligent life form had evolved from prey animals that prioritized survival over victory. The concept of preferring death to defeat was literally incomprehensible to their psychology. But Jake Morrison and his teams understood something that the rest of the galaxy had never learned. Sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to be willing to die for it. Sometimes mercy can only be preserved through violence that makes no rational sense to peaceful minds. The battle raged for 18 hours. By the end, 60% of the Kreth Imperial fleet had been destroyed or disabled. The humans and their allies had lost every ship, every base, and nearly every person involved in the resistance. But they had accomplished something unprecedented. In galactic history, they had made conquests so costly that the conquerors could no longer afford to win. Supreme Commander Vextar found himself commanding the scattered remnants of a fleet that had once seemed invincible. His ships were damaged, his officers were dead or traumatized, and his own sanity felt questionable. The planned bombardment of Valari Prime was now impossible because he no longer had enough functional ships to carry it out. "Signal the high command," he ordered with a voice that had lost all authority. "The Valari system cannot be held. Request immediate withdrawal to Imperial space." The message he sent would change the course of galactic history. For the first time in their expansion, the Kreth Empire was retreating from a conquered world not because of superior enemy technology, but because they had encountered an enemy that preferred mutual destruction to acceptance of defeat. Jake Morrison died when his command asteroid was destroyed by a Kreth bombardment in the final hour of battle. His last transmission was heard across the system by every surviving resistance fighter, and every Kreth ship still capable of receiving messages. "This is Captain Jake Morrison to all Kreth forces. You came to our friends seeking submission. You found death instead. Remember this lesson when you look at other peaceful worlds and think they are easy targets. There are deathworlders in the galaxy now, and we do not surrender. We do not submit. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. And we make that protection so expensive that aggressors cannot afford to pay the price. Earth sends its regards." The words echoed through space as the last human ships exploded in suicide attacks against Kreth vessels. The Valari and their allies had been saved, but the cost had been the complete sacrifice of their protectors. In the years that followed, the story of the Valari War spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that had lived in fear of the Kreth Empire began to understand that resistance was possible. The humans had shown that superior technology could be overcome by superior determination, and that even prey species could fight back if they were willing to accept help from predators. The Kreth Empire never recovered from the losses they suffered in the Valari system. Other species began to resist their expansion, and the empire gradually collapsed as conquest became too expensive to sustain. The humans had broken the cycle of submission that had allowed bullies to dominate the galaxy, but the victory came, with a price that haunted every survivor. The peaceful species of the galaxy had asked for mercy and received salvation, but they had also witnessed something that challenged their understanding of morality itself. The humans had saved them not through superior wisdom or technology, but through a willingness to embrace violence so complete that it defied rational explanation. Veltar, now the leader of the Free Valari Federation, stood in the memorial garden, dedicated to the human crews who had died protecting his people. The monument was simple, a block of earth stone with the names of every human who had participated in the resistance. At the bottom, an inscription read simply, "They sought mercy, but brought war, and through war, they gave us peace." The galaxy was safer now, but it would never again be innocent. Every peaceful species knew that somewhere in the darkness between stars, deathworlders were waiting to protect them. The knowledge was both comforting and terrifying, because it meant that salvation sometimes required the kind of violence that gentle minds could never fully understand or accept. Earth had sent its children to the stars as explorers and diplomats. They had become warriors instead, not by choice but by necessity. In protecting the innocent, they had revealed truths about survival and sacrifice that the galaxy had never needed to learn. The deathworlders had kept their promise. They had brought war to those who preyed on the peaceful. But in doing so, they had also brought the terrible understanding that sometimes mercy can only be preserved through actions that merciful beings cannot bring themselves to take. Supreme Commander Vextar of the Kreth Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. 3 months ago, the Valari system had been another quiet slave world producing resources for the Empire. Now it was a nightmare where supply convoys disappeared, communication relays exploded without warning, and entire garrisons went silent in the middle of the night. "Report," he commanded his subordinates, his mandibles clicking with irritation. 17 more supply ships failed to report in yesterday, his aide replied nervously. The mining operations on Valari Prime are operating at 60% capacity due to sabotage. 3 orbital defense platforms have been destroyed by unknown attackers. Vextar turned his multiple eyes toward the tactical display. The Valari system was marked with red symbols showing damaged or destroyed Kreth facilities. The pattern made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. "These attacks are impossible," he said finally. "The resistance fighters are using Valari civilian craft and stolen equipment. They should not be able to threaten our forces." What Supreme Commander Vextar did not understand was that Jake Morrison had spent the last 3 months turning every piece of space debris, abandoned station and hidden asteroid into a potential weapon. The ESV Horizon was no longer traveling as one ship. Its crew and equipment had been scattered across dozens of locations throughout the system. On a derelict cargo hauler hidden in the shadow of Valari Prime's largest moon, Amy Rodriguez was putting the finishing touches on another improvised explosive device. The Kreth had never encountered enemies who used suicide attacks, so their security systems were not designed to detect someone willing to die to complete their mission. "The charges are ready," she reported to Jake over their encrypted communication system. "We can take out their main communication hub, but whoever sets them off won't be coming back." Jake's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "I'll do it myself. Captain, with respect, that's stupid. We need you alive to coordinate the resistance." "Then who?" The answer came from an unexpected source. A Valari volunteer named Nixval had been listening to their conversation. Despite his species' biological inability to think aggressively, months of watching his people suffer had changed something in his mind. "I will do it," he said quietly. "My family died in the slave camps. I have nothing left except the chance to hurt the ones who killed them." Amy looked at the thin, gentle being who had never hurt another creature in his life. The idea that he was volunteering for a suicide mission felt wrong in ways she could not explain. But she also understood that sometimes gentle people could be pushed too far. Meanwhile, on a captured Kreth patrol ship, Lisa Carter was making discoveries that would change everything. She had been studying Kreth biology and psychology for months, trying to understand how their minds worked. What she found was both fascinating and terrifying. "Jake, you need to hear this," she said over their communication network. "The Kreth aren't just bullies. They're biologically programmed to expect submission. Their entire nervous system is built around dominance hierarchies. When they encounter someone who won't submit, their brains literally cannot process it." "What does that mean for us?" "It means they're going to keep escalating until they either win completely or break psychologically. There's no middle ground for them." As if to prove Lisa's point, Supreme Commander Vextar made a decision that would define the rest of the war. Unable to comprehend how inferior enemies could continue to resist his forces, he concluded that the problem was insufficient force projection. "Send word to the Imperial fleet," he commanded. "I want every available ship brought to this system. We will demonstrate to these terrorists what happens when they defy the Empire." The Imperial fleet was massive by galactic standards. 50 capital ships, each one capable of destroying cities from orbit. 200 escort vessels designed to intimidate planets into surrender. Support craft carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire continents. When they arrived in the Valari system, they expected to find the resistance crushed and order restored. Instead, they found empty space. Jake had seen them coming days before they arrived. The Kreth Empire moved there, fleets like parades. broadcasting their approach and demanding submission before they even reached their targets. It was perfect for intimidation and terrible for military surprise. All teams execute dispersal protocol, Jake commanded from his hidden position on a disguised asteroid mining platform. Remember, they can't fight what they can't find. The human teams and their alien allies scattered throughout the system like seeds in the wind. Every abandoned facility, every piece of space debris, every hidden cave became a potential base of operations. The Kreth arrived expecting to crush a rebellion and found nothing to fight. For 3 days, the Imperial fleet searched the system for enemies to destroy. They found empty ships drifting in space, abandoned bases that still had power but no crew, and silence where they expected to hear pleas for mercy. On the 4th day the attacks began. Nina Brooks led the first strike team against a Kreth battleship that had separated from the main fleet to investigate a distress signal. The signal was fake, broadcast from a transmitter attached to a chunk of asteroid ice. When the battleship moved close enough to investigate, Nina's team launched their assault. They came from 6 different directions in small craft that looked like civilian transports or cargo haulers. Instead of trying to fight the battleship directly, they attached themselves to its hull like parasites and began cutting their way inside. The Kreth crew had never experienced anything like it. Their training covered battles between large ships, not boarding actions by desperate enemies willing to cut through armored hulls with improvised tools. By the time they understood what was happening, human teams were inside their ship, but Nina's team was not there to capture the battleship. They were there to plant explosives in its reactor core and escape before it exploded. The concept of deliberately destroying an enemy ship while still inside it was so foreign to Kreth thinking that their security systems had no protocols for preventing it. The battleship exploded 6 hours after the boarding action began. The explosion was visible from across the system, a bright new star that announced to every resistance fighter that Kreth ships could be destroyed by determined enemies. Supreme Commander Vextar watched his battleship die and felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. Not fear of death, which was a concept most Kreth understood, but fear of fighting an enemy that made no sense. How did they get aboard? He demanded of his surviving captains. Our shields were up. Our weapons were armed. How did such small craft penetrate our defenses? None of his subordinates had an answer that satisfied him. The truth was that Kreth defenses were designed to stop other Kreth ships, not desperate enemies in improvised attack craft willing to ram through shield barriers and cut through armor, plating. Over the following weeks, the attacks escalated in both frequency and creativity. Amy's engineering teams turned cargo containers into guided missiles. Greg's pilots used Kreth patrol craft to attack other Kreth ships, creating confusion about who was friend or enemy. Lisa's intelligence teams intercepted Kreth communications and used them to lure ships into ambushes. Most terrifying of all, Jake's human teams began broadcasting the locations of their own forces to ensure that Kreth attacks would result in maximum casualties on both sides. The concept of mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome was completely incomprehensible to species that had evolved as prey animals. Supreme Commander Vextar found himself facing a military situation that had no precedent in Kreth history. His enemies were not trying to win in any conventional sense. They were trying to make victory so costly that the Kreth would abandon their conquest entirely. They are insane, he reported to the Imperial High Command. They fight as if death means nothing to them. They destroy their own ships to damage ours. They attack positions they cannot hold just to kill our soldiers. This is not warfare as we understand it. The response from the High Command was predictable. If current force levels were insufficient, then more force was required. If the enemies were hiding throughout the system, then the entire system must be destroyed as an example to other potential rebels. The order came through on encrypted channels that Lisa's teams had been monitoring for weeks. Supreme Commander Vextar was authorized to use orbital bombardment weapons against any planet showing signs of resistance. If necessary, he could sterilize entire worlds to end the rebellion. When Jake received the intercepted message, he felt ice form in his stomach. The Kreth were preparing to commit genocide rather than accept that their empire could be successfully resisted. All teams, prepare for final protocol, he broadcast to every human team and alien ally in the system. They're going to try to kill everyone rather than admit they can be beaten. It's time to show them what deathworlders really fight like when everything they care about is threatened. The final battle was coming, and Jake Morrison knew that everything humanity had learned about survival on Earth was about to be tested against an empire that preferred universal death to the possibility of defeat. Word of the humans' arrival spread through the underground networks faster than anyone expected. Within days, the Horizon was receiving messages from resistance groups across 3 different star systems. Jake Morrison found himself talking to species he had never imagined could exist. The HFY were crystalline beings who communicated through colored light patterns. Their home world had been turned into a massive factory where their people were forced to grow synthetic crystals for Kreth technology. The Windborn were gaseous creatures who lived in the upper atmosphere of gas giant planets, now trapped in containment fields and used as living batteries for Kreth ships. The Deep Sworn were aquatic beings whose ocean worlds had been drained to power Kreth industrial operations. "Captain," Lisa said during one of their daily briefings, "I'm seeing a pattern in all these species. They're all what we would classify as prey animals. Herbivores, filter feeders, or energy absorbers. None of them evolved any form of aggressive behavior." Colonel Pete Jackson, the ship's military historian, had been studying every piece of data they could gather about galactic warfare. "It explains why Kreth tactics are so simple," he said. "They've never needed complex strategies. Show up with big ships, demand surrender, and occupy the planet when everyone gives up." Jake looked at the tactical displays showing Kreth positions throughout the Valari system. Their ships moved in predictable patterns, following routes that made sense for intimidation but were terrible for actual combat. "They're not warriors," he realized. "They're just bullies with good technology." Sergeant Nina Brooks had been working with Valari volunteers, trying to teach them basic resistance techniques. The results were frustrating for everyone involved. "Captain, they literally cannot think in terms of violence," she reported. "When I show them how to set a simple ambush, their minds just shut down. It's like asking someone to stop breathing." "That's actually not far from the truth," Helen explained. "Their brain chemistry actively prevents aggressive thoughts. It's a biological safety mechanism that kept their species from destroying itself during their evolution." But something interesting was happening among the other species. Unlike the Valari, some of the crystalline HFY and gaseous Windborn were showing interest in human tactics. They couldn't fight directly, but they could help in other ways. The first human-led operation was planned for a Kreth supply convoy that traveled between the outer planets and Valari Prime. Jake decided to lead the mission himself, taking a modified Valari civilian transport loaded with volunteers from all 4 species. "Remember," he told the mixed crew as they prepared to leave the Horizon, "we're not trying to destroy their ships. We want to hit them, take what we can, and disappear before they can respond." The convoy consisted of 3 large Kreth vessels, moving in a straight line through empty space. Their formation was perfect for intimidation and terrible for defense. The escort ship stayed close to the supply vessels instead of spreading out to watch for threats. "In position," Greg reported from the pilot seat of their captured transport. "They're not even scanning for ships our size." Jake smiled grimly. The Kreth had never learned to fear small ships because small ships had never been a threat to them. That was about to change. "Nina, take us in close to the middle supply ship. Lisa, as soon as we dock, you and your team get to their computer systems. Amy, you know what to do with their engines." The plan was simple, but required thinking that was completely foreign to galactic warfare standards. Instead of trying to destroy the convoy, they were going to rob it and disappear. Their ship attached to the Kreth supply vessel's docking port. The Kreth crew was so surprised they didn't even sound an alarm for several minutes. By then, human teams were already inside their ship. Jake led the boarding party through corridors designed for beings much taller than humans. The advantage was unexpected. The Kreth had built everything for their own size, making it hard for them to see or shoot at enemies who stayed low. The first Kreth they encountered were cargo handlers, tall insectoid beings with hard black shells and multiple
arms.
When they saw the humans, they made loud clicking sounds that might have been communication or alarm calls. "Surrender your ship," Jake called out, knowing the translation system would make his words clear. The Kreth looked at each other with confusion. They had probably never heard those words before, since they were usually the ones demanding surrender. When they didn't respond immediately, Nina and her team moved forward. The sight of humans advancing instead of retreating seemed to break something in the Kreth's understanding of how conflicts worked. They backed away, clicking frantically. "They don't know what to do," Nina observed. "They've never been boarded before." Lisa's team reached the computer systems and began downloading everything they could find. Amy's engineers were in the engine room, installing devices that would disable the ship's faster-than-light drive. Other team members were loading stolen supplies onto their transport. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes. By the time the Kreth escort ships realized what was happening, the human team was already undocking and accelerating away. "Pursuit. Ships are following us," Greg reported. "But they're staying in formation instead of spreading out to cut off escape routes." Jake watched the tactical display with interest. The Kreth ships were faster and more powerful than their stolen transport, but they were flying like they were in a parade instead of a battle. "Take us through the asteroid field." "Captain, that's dangerous for our ship too. But we know it's dangerous. They're going to learn." The chase through the asteroids was educational for everyone involved. The human team flew their damaged transport through gaps that seemed impossible, using every trick they knew about desperate escapes. The Kreth ships followed in perfect formation, trying to maintain their intimidating appearance even while flying through an obstacle course. Two of the escort ships collided with asteroids because they refused to break formation. The third ship gave up the chase when it became clear the humans were willing to take risks that made no sense from a galactic perspective. Back at their hidden base, Jake's team analyzed what they had learned. The stolen supplies were useful, but the information was even more valuable. "Look at these tactical manuals," Pete said, studying the downloaded data. "Every engagement follows the same pattern. Arrive, demand surrender, wait for submission, occupy. There's no contingency planning for extended resistance. Their communication systems are even worse," Lisa added. "They rely on direct orders from commanders instead of allowing individual initiative. Break their command structure, and the individual ships don't know what to do." Amy was examining the technical specifications of Kreth ships. Their designs prioritize intimidation over functionality. These ships look scary, but they're not built for actual combat. Too many weak points, too much wasted space for ceremonial features. Jake looked at the faces of his mixed-species team. The Volari still looked confused by what they had done, but the other species were beginning to understand something new. They were seeing that the seemingly invincible Kreth Empire had critical weaknesses that could be exploited. "We're going to do this again," Jake announced, "but bigger this time. We're going to hit multiple targets simultaneously and show every resistance group in the galaxy that the Kreth can be beaten." "What about their reinforcements?" Greg asked. "When they realize they're losing ships, they'll send more." Jake smiled with the kind of expression that would have been familiar to any predator on Earth. "Let them come. The more ships they send, the more ships we can capture or destroy, and the more we teach them about fighting an enemy that refuses to surrender." Nina nodded with understanding. "We're not just fighting for the Volari anymore. We're showing every enslaved species that resistance is possible." As they planned their next operations, Jake realized that they were no longer just trying to help one group of peaceful aliens. They were starting a revolution that would spread across the galaxy. The Kreth Empire had grown powerful by facing enemies who thought like prey animals. Now they would learn what happened when they faced enemies who thought like predators. The war was escalating, and for the first time since their expansion began, the Kreth were the ones who should be afraid. The ESV horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Volari system, and Jake Morrison felt his stomach turn at what he saw. Through the main screen, Volari Prime looked nothing like the beautiful world Kethvar had described. Dark smoke rose from the continents, and the floating cities that once danced above crystal lakes now sat like metal scars on the planet's surface. "My God," Lisa whispered from her station. "What have they done to this place?" "Lieutenant Commander," Greg Adams, the ship's tactical officer, was running scans of the system. "Captain, I'm reading massive industrial operations on the surface. Strip mining, heavy manufacturing, and what looks like prison complexes. The atmospheric composition has changed. There's too much carbon dioxide and not enough oxygen." Amy shook her head as she read her engineering displays. "They're literally killing the planet. The ecosystem readings are terrible." Before Jake could respond, Danny's communication array came alive. "Captain, we're getting a transmission. It's weak and scrambled, but it's coming from the planet's surface." "Put it through." The screen flickered, showing a Valari face that looked much thinner and more tired than Kethvar. The being's blue skin had turned gray, and there were dark marks around his eyes. "Unknown ship, please identify yourself. If you are Kreth, know that we have nothing left to give you. If you are someone else, please help us." Jake stepped forward. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earthship Horizon. We received your message and came to help. Are you safe to talk?" The Valari's eyes went wide. "Earth? The Deathworld? You actually exist?" The being looked around nervously. "I am Veltar, and I lead what remains of our resistance. We cannot talk long. Kreth patrols scan for unauthorized transmissions. Can you meet us somewhere safe? There is an abandoned mining station in the asteroid belt. Coordinates follow. But Captain, you must understand what you face. The Kreth are not like other species. They do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They see other life forms as things to be used until they break." The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge quiet except for the soft beeping of their instruments. Greg looked up from his tactical station. "Captain, I recommend we proceed carefully. If the Kreth are as dangerous as the Valari say, we need to learn more before we act." Jake nodded. "Set course for those coordinates. Lisa, I want you to analyze everything we know about both species. Ryan, start thinking about how we might fight an enemy with superior technology." The journey to the asteroid belt took 6 hours. During that time, the crew worked to understand what they were facing. Lisa's analysis of Valari biology confirmed what they had suspected. The Valari were prey animals who had evolved intelligence on peaceful worlds. Their bones were light, their muscles were built for running rather than fighting, and their nervous systems were designed to avoid conflict rather than engage in it. They're physically incapable of the kind of violence that comes naturally to humans, Lisa explained to the senior staff. Their brain chemistry literally prevents aggressive behavior. It's like asking a deer to fight a wolf. Ryan had been studying the technical data about Kreth weapons and ships. Their technology is definitely more advanced than ours, but there's something odd about their tactical approach. Every battle I've analyzed shows the same pattern. They arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and then occupy the planet when the enemy gives up. "What's odd about that?" Amy asked. "They've never fought anyone who didn't surrender," Ryan replied. "Look at these battle reports. The longest fight in their records lasted 3 hours. Most of their conquests were over in minutes." Jake was beginning to understand something important. They're bullies. They've never faced real resistance because every species they've met thinks like the Valari. When they reached the asteroid belt, they found the abandoned mining station exactly where Veltar had said it would be. The structure was old and barely functional, but it provided shelter from Kreth sensors. The Horizon docked carefully, and Jake led a small team inside. Veltar was waiting for them with a group of other Valari refugees. When they saw the humans, their large eyes went even wider. Dr. Helen Murphy, the ship's psychologist, had joined the away team to help with first contact protocols. "You are smaller than the story said," Veltar observed. "But there is something different about you. Something in your eyes." Jake looked at the Valari refugees and felt anger building in his chest. They were thin and scared, with marks on their wrists from what looked like restraints. These beings had never hurt anyone, yet they had been turned into slaves. "Tell us about the Kreth," Jake said simply. Veltar gestured to a large display screen that still worked in the old station. Images appeared showing tall, insectoid beings, with hard black shells covering their bodies. Their faces were angular and cold, with multiple eyes and mandibles that clicked when they spoke. They evolved on a world where different tribes fought over territory and resources, Veltar explained. But their conflicts were always about dominance, never about survival. The weak would submit to the strong, and life would continue. They do not understand the concept of fighting to the death. Helen leaned forward with interest. What do you mean? In all their history, when faced with superior force, the losing side would surrender and accept their new place. This is how their society works. The strong rule, the weak serve, but everyone lives. They cannot understand why anyone would choose death over submission. Jake felt something click in his mind. They've never met predators. What? Veltar asked. Confused, Lisa stepped forward to explain. On Earth, Captain Morrison's world, some animals hunt and kill other animals for food. We call them predators. The animals they hunt are called prey. Humans evolved from animals that were both predator and prey. We learned to hunt, but we also learned to fight back when we were hunted. Veltar's eyes went wide with something that might have been horror. You mean you actually killed other living things? For food? Among other reasons, Ryan said grimly. We also killed to protect our families, our territory, and our freedom. We learned that some things are worth dying for. That is impossible, one of the other Valari said. No intelligent species could develop from such violence. Helen smiled sadly. That's exactly the point. Every species in this galaxy seems to have evolved from prey animals or peaceful herbivores. You've never encountered a predator species that became intelligent? The Kreth are bullies, but they're still prey animals at heart. They expect submission when they show force. Jake was beginning to see the shape of a plan. What happens when the Kreth encounter resistance they can't immediately crush? It has never happened, Veltar admitted. Every species they have met either surrenders immediately or is destroyed so quickly that resistance is meaningless. But what if someone fought back? Really fought back? What if someone refused to surrender no matter what? Veltar looked confused. Why would anyone do that? It would mean certain death. Not certain, Jake said quietly. Just likely, and sometimes likely death is better than certain slavery. The Valari refugees looked at each other with expressions the humans couldn't quite read. Finally, Veltar spoke again. The stories about your deathworld, are they true? Did Earth really try to kill you every day? Every day, Jake confirmed. Weather that could freeze or burn us to death. Animals that saw us as food. Diseases that killed without warning. Natural disasters that destroyed everything we built. Earth was not kind to humanity. Then how did you survive? We learned to fight back, Ryan said. We learned that running away doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to stand and fight, even when the odds are against you. And sometimes, Jake added, you have to be willing to hurt the thing that's trying to hurt you. The bridge fell silent as the Valari tried to process this concept. Finally, Veltar spoke in a whisper. The Kreth have never faced anything like you, have they? No, Jake said, and I don't think they're going to like it very much. As they prepared to return to the horizon, Jake looked at the scared but hopeful faces of the Valari refugees. These people had asked for mercy and protection, but Jake was beginning to realize that mercy and protection sometimes required things that peaceful species could never do themselves. The Kreth Empire was about to learn what happened when predators decided to protect prey. They were about to discover that deathworlders didn't just bring war, they brought a kind of war that the galaxy had never seen before. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ESV horizon and watched the stars through the main view screen. 3 years had passed since Earth sent their first ship to explore space beyond their solar system. The mission was simple. Find other life forms and make contact. What they found was bigger than anyone back home could imagine. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Jake looked at his crew working at their stations. Dr. Lisa Carter sat at the science station checking data from their latest scans. Commander Ryan Phillips reviewed security reports at his console. Chief Engineer Amy Rodriguez monitored the ship's systems from her post. These people had become his family during their long journey through space. A sharp beep from the communications array broke the silence. Lieutenant Danny Walsh turned from his station with wide eyes. Captain, we're getting a transmission. It's not from Earth. Jake felt his heart beat faster. Put it through, Danny. The main screen flickered and changed. Instead of stars, they saw a face that was clearly not human. The being had pale blue skin that seemed to glow softly. Its eyes were large and dark, and its head was longer than a human head. When it spoke, the voice was soft and musical, but the translation system made the words clear. Please, if anyone can hear this message, we need help. My name is Kethvar, and I speak for the Valari Federation. Our worlds are dying. Our people are slaves. We have heard stories of a species from a death world, beings who know war like no others. If you exist, if you can hear us, please help us. The transmission continued. Kethvar explained that his people once lived in peace across 7 star systems. Their cities floated above crystal-clear lakes on worlds with low gravity and gentle weather. They spent their time creating art, studying the stars and helping each other. Then the Kreth Empire came. The Kreth are not like us, Kethvar said. His voice carried pain that needed no translation. They are tall and covered in hard shells like insects. They came with ships that could destroy our cities from space. When we asked why they wanted to hurt us, they said we were resources to be used. They took our worlds in days. Now our people work in their mines until they die. Lisa looked up from her station. Captain, I'm getting massive amounts of data with this transmission. Star charts, technical specifications, biological information. This is incredible. Jake nodded but kept watching Kethvar speak. The alien's large eyes seemed to look directly at him through the screen. We have heard whispers of Earth, Kethvar continued. Stories say it is a death world where the very air and water try to kill all life. They say creatures there fight each other every day just to survive. Most think these are just stories, but some believe. They say the death world made its children into something the galaxy has never seen. Warriors who know no fear. Hunters who never give up. If these stories are true, if you people of Earth exist, we offer everything we have. Our medical knowledge, our star maps, our technology. Please, save us from the Kreth. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Jake looked at his crew and saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. They had come to space looking for new friends. Instead, they found a war. Ryan stood up from his station. Captain, we need to think about this carefully. We don't know anything about these Kreth or how powerful they are. This could be a trap. It's not a trap, Lisa said firmly. She had been studying the data that came with the message. The biological scans are real. The Valari are exactly what they appear to be. Their bone structure shows they evolved on low-gravity worlds. Their muscle development is consistent with peaceful herbivores. Everything checks out. Amy looked worried. But what about their technology? The data shows the Kreth ships are way ahead of ours. We might not stand a chance against them. Jake walked to the center of the bridge. He had been a military officer before becoming an explorer. He knew the weight of command and the cost of difficult decisions. But he also knew something else. He knew what it meant to protect those who could not protect themselves. Danny, how long would it take us to reach the Valari systems? About 2 weeks at maximum speed, Captain. And how long to get a message back to Earth? 4 months, sir. And that's just one way. Jake nodded. By the time they could ask Earth for orders and get a response, the Valari might all be dead. The decision was his to make. He looked at each of his crew members. These were good people who had signed up to explore space, not fight wars. But they were also humans from Earth, and Earth had taught them things that other worlds apparently never learned. Lisa, what do you make of Kethvar's description of Earth as a death world? Lisa smiled sadly. He's not wrong, Captain. Compared to most worlds that could support life, Earth is incredibly dangerous. We have predators, natural disasters, diseases, and climate changes that would kill most species. But that's what made us strong. The Valari evolved as prey animals, Ryan added. Look at their bone structure, their large eyes, their flight response. They're built to run from danger, not fight it. Jake made his decision. Set course for the Valari Federation. Maximum speed. Captain, Ryan said carefully, are we really going to war with an empire we know nothing about? Jake looked at the screen where Kethvar's face had been moments before. He thought about the pain in those large dark eyes and the hope in that soft voice. Ryan, Earth didn't make us into warriors so we could conquer others. It made us into warriors so we could protect those who can't protect themselves. The Volari asked for help. We're going to give it to them. The crew exchanged looks, then began their work. Amy increased power to the engines. Danny plotted their course to the Volari systems. Lisa started analyzing everything they knew about both the Volari and their Kreth enemies. Ryan began planning for combat scenarios they might face. As the horizon changed course and accelerated toward an unknown war, Jake wondered if they were making a terrible mistake. But deep in his heart, he knew they were doing the right thing. Earth had made humanity into something special, something the galaxy had never seen before. Maybe it was time to show the universe what deathworlders could do when they fought for others instead of themselves. The stars ahead looked the same as always, but Jake knew their mission had changed forever. They were no longer explorers. They were Earth's first warriors among the stars, carrying the hopes of people they had never met and the weight of humanity's reputation in the galaxy. The war was coming, and the deathworlders were ready.